The storm outside didn't ask for permission. It tore through the Manhattan skyline, drumming rain against the glass walls of Blackwood Tower like a war cry. Inside, the annual shareholders meeting was in full swing. Hundreds of suits, screens flashing numbers, graphs climbing like ambitious mountains. Rebecca Blackwood's voice razor sharp as ever, slicing through tension with calculated grace. Her tailored black dress and single strand of pearls stood in stark contrast to the sea of navy suits surrounding her. At 42, she commanded the room with the confidence of someone who'd never known failure. 15 years as CEO of Blackwood Biotech had turned her into a legend. The company's stock had tripled. Their cancer treatments were revolutionizing medicine. Rebecca was untouchable, until she wasn't. The words died in her throat mid-sentence. Not a graceful pause, not a dramatic beat, a collapse. Her hand trembled before falling limp. The laser pointer clattered to the floor as Rebecca's legs gave way. Her face, normally composed, twisted in confusion and pain. A wave of panic surged through the room. Security rushed the stage. Assistants fumbled with their phones, voices breaking as they called for help. Daniel Foster, her COO, barked at paramedics as if he could command time itself, but Rebecca didn't move. At St. Mary's Medical Center, doctors worked under blinding fluorescent lights. What was happening wasn't cardiac arrest, at least not in the traditional sense. Rebecca's body had entered some kind of toxic immune response, her nervous system attacking itself like a snake biting its tail. White coats huddled outside her room, voices lowered in confidence and awe. Every known medication failed. Her vitals plummeted. Oxygen dropped. 1 hour, 2. Then came the whisper that floats in all emergency rooms when brilliance alone isn't enough. We need a miracle. Meanwhile, 2 floors down in the blood donation unit, a man in a military-issued jacket with worn cuffs and a quiet posture sat patiently. Dr. Michael Sullivan, former U.S. Army field surgeon, now a part-time ER physician at a Brooklyn clinic, was there for a simple reason. He donated blood every 6 weeks. Not for the $50 stipend, not for recognition, just because it was the only habit that had survived his wife's funeral 4 years ago. The nurse pricked his vein, watched the deep red flow fill the bag, then paused. She squinted at her screen. The scanner blinked strangely. His blood showed atypical antibody behavior, something she'd never seen before. A call was made upstairs. Another scan, then a rush. Would Dr. Sullivan be willing to test for compatibility with a critical patient? Michael didn't hesitate. Hook me up. 42 minutes later, Rebecca's breathing stabilized. Not fully healed, but her immune system halted its attack. Her nervous tremors faded. The doctors couldn't explain it. Michael didn't try to. He'd been in battle zones where triage decisions felt like gambling with ghosts. But one thing was clear. His blood had done something remarkable. 2 days later, Rebecca opened her eyes to sterile ceilings and white noise. Her memory blurred. She remembered a boardroom, a pain in her spine, falling, then nothing. Daniel sat by her bedside, exhausted but composed. Dark circles hung under his eyes, his normally perfect appearance showing cracks. They dated briefly 3 years ago, a relationship that ended when Rebecca chose the company over their engagement. Yet here he was waiting. You're lucky, Rebecca. Your heart nearly stopped. They called in specialists from across the country. Nothing worked until they gave you blood from a walk-in donor. A nobody, he added with a strange edge to his voice. Rebecca's throat felt like sandpaper. Who? Michael Sullivan. Doctor, Army vet, widowed, currently working at a clinic in Brooklyn. Refused to give interviews. Said he didn't do it for press. Rebecca struggled to sit up. I offered him compensation. How much? 10 million? He turned it down. Her frown deepened. Get him here. But Michael had already disappeared. When the hospital contacted him again, he declined the invitation. He didn't even collect the standard blood donor check. When pressed for a reason, his reply was calm and surgical. I'm not interested in being anyone's hero. I did what was needed. That's enough. The media caught wind of the story. Billionaire saved by stranger, headlined everywhere. But no one could pin down the mysterious donor. No LinkedIn, no social media, no photos beyond an old military ID. He had refused to interviews, declined Rebecca's legal team, and ignored corporate emissaries sent to negotiate. He even changed his phone number. That's when Rebecca's curiosity turned personal. She was not used to being ignored. Not as a CEO, not as a woman. Since the age of 25, she'd been the youngest in every boardroom, youngest biotech patent holder, youngest to close billion-dollar contracts. People listened when she spoke. They asked to listen. But this man, this ghost of a soldier, had saved her life and then disappeared like she was just another patient on a battlefield. And that bothered her more than she cared to admit. In her recovery suite, she sat by the window while rain returned to the city softer this time. She held the anonymous blood donor report in one hand, her IV line in the other. Dr. Michael Sullivan, she said aloud, as if invoking his name might make him appear. 3 blocks away, Michael stood silently in his daughter's room, tucking in Emma for the night. 10 years old, bright-eyed, a bookworm like her late mother. She had no idea her father had just saved the most powerful woman in New York. "Dad," she mumbled, sleepily. "Do you ever miss the army?" He paused, considering the weight of her question. "Sometimes, but not the reasons I left." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you help someone today?" Michael looked out the window toward the city lights. "Yes, I helped someone. And that would be enough for now." The first thing you'd notice walking into Michael Sullivan's home was how quiet it was. Not in the cold, empty way that loneliness leaves behind, but in the way a man builds stillness around him, like armor. The 2-bedroom apartment above a florist in a quieter part of Brooklyn felt lived in, yet spare. Worn hardwood floors, mismatched furniture, and books stacked against walls instead of trophies. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon. On the fridge were exactly 2 magnets, one shaped like a stethoscope, the other holding a photo of Emma at age 5 with a drawing of her late mother. Sarah's smile radiated from the paper captured by a child's hand in bright crayon strokes. Michael sat at the small dining table sorting through paperwork while Emma worked through math homework beside him. Her hair tied in a lopsided ponytail, a pencil between her teeth as she squinted at fractions. "You know," she said without looking up, "if you let me get a cat, this place wouldn't feel so much like a bunker." He looked at her over his coffee mug. "Cats and asthma don't get along, kiddo. You had asthma when I was 5, not now. That's like banning pizza because you choked on it once." He smirked. "It was a traumatic pizza." She rolled her eyes, then went back to writing. Michael was halfway through reviewing his patient charts when his phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He let it ring. 10 seconds later, a text came in. "Mr. Sullivan, please call back. This concerns Rebecca Blackwood's medical condition. Blackwood MedOps." He stared at the message. There had been 5 calls in the past 2 days, 4 emails, 1 couriered envelope. All from the same company, all politely persistent, all ignored. Meanwhile, in a private lab inside Blackwood Biotech's executive clinic, Rebecca sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly, as she watched test results flicker onto screens. The lead researcher adjusted his glasses. "We triple-checked everything. Your condition's progression isn't just halted, it's regressing. Nerve inflammation down, autoimmune markers stabilizing." Rebecca blinked. "Because of his blood. Because of something in his blood. It's not just compatibility. His blood carries a rare antibody structure that somehow rewires the neural immune communication. We've never seen anything like it. So I need more," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. The doctor hesitated. "With his antibody levels, we can't extract too frequently without causing harm. Ideally, we'd want access to him in a clinical setting. If he's open to longer-term contribution, he already declined." May I ask why? Rebecca exhaled, jaw tight. "Because Michael Sullivan doesn't want to be bought." That afternoon, Michael stood in the break room of the urgent care clinic where he worked weekends. He was pouring cold coffee into a paper cup when the door opened. The woman who entered didn't wear makeup or heels like in her magazine covers, just dark jeans, a navy coat, and the same eyes that had once commanded billion-dollar rooms. "Rebecca Blackwood," he said simply, as if she were a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. Rebecca studied him carefully. In person, Michael Sullivan was taller than his military photo suggested. His shoulders carried an invisible weight, and his eyes, deep blue with flecks of gray, held a steady, assessing gaze. The kind of eyes that had seen too much but still chose to look. "You tracked me down to a walk-in clinic," Michael said, taking a sip from his cup. The coffee was bitter, day-old. "I'm thorough," she replied, still not interested. "I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to ask a favor for clarity. You saved my life. I offered you $10 million and you walked away without a word. I just want to understand why. Michael looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Because you thought that saving someone's life should be translatable into a check. You assumed that a life and death moment could be followed by a transaction. It was ownership, not gratitude. Silence stretched between them. Rebecca took a slow breath. All right, let's say I accept that money offends you. What if I asked you to be involved not as a donor, but as a doctor? He didn't react. I want you to take over my case, she continued. Be part of my recovery. Medically, ethically, your terms, your rules. No labs, no extraction beyond what's safe, no PR. Just you and me, doctor and patient. Michael sat down carefully like the chair might give out under the weight of what she just proposed. I haven't practiced long-term care in years. I'm barely holding this job. You were a field surgeon in Kandahar. You led mobile trauma units under fire. You're more qualified than anyone I've ever met. His eyes darkened. And yet, I couldn't save my wife. Her expression softened not with pity, but with recognition. That's not a disqualification, Michael. That's a reason why you care. He looked away, jaw clenched. I don't want to be someone's miracle. People put you on a pedestal just to blame you when you fall off. I don't want a miracle. I want a partner in survival. The words lingered quiet and heavy. Later that night, Michael stood by Emma's bedside watching her sleep. She looked so much like Sarah, it hurt sometimes. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, I might take on something new. It could get complicated, Emma half awake mumbled. Does it help someone? Michael hesitated. Yes. Then do it, Dad. You're good at helping people. And just like that, Jay, the man who had once saved lives under mortar fire, who'd rebuilt himself from the rubble of grief, made a quiet decision that would ripple across both their lives. The next morning, Rebecca's assistant received a single-line reply. I will take the case, but I don't belong to you. Dr. Sullivan. Blackwood Tower was a monument of glass and steel, 38 stories tall and surgically modern. It didn't whisper wealth, it announced it. The moment Michael stepped into the private elevator that would take him to the executive floor, he felt the air grow colder, denser, the kind that was filtered 6 times a day and smelled like power. He didn't flinch. He'd walked through hospitals mid-bombardment. He'd stitched soldiers together with 1 working hand and 2 minutes to spare. But this felt like entering a different kind of battlefield. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a minimalist hallway flanked by white marble and dark oak. A young assistant waited, hands folded, and nodded slightly. Dr. Sullivan, welcome. Ms. Blackwood is expecting you. Michael followed past glass offices, motion sensor lighting, and walls that didn't carry sound. The world here was silent, like a luxury submarine, cruising above the chaos of everyday life. They stopped at a set of tall, matte, black double doors. The assistant tapped once. Rebecca's voice, calm but commanding, rang out. Come in. The office was large enough to host a wedding. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Rebecca stood near the edge, arms crossed, dressed in charcoal gray, with a silver lapel pin shaped like the Blackwood Biotech logo. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw Michael. You're punctual, she said. Comes from being deployed, he replied simply. She gestured toward the chair in front of her desk. Let's get to it. A printed contract waited between them, leather-bound and clinical. Michael flipped through the pages, slowly scanning the language. Medical autonomy, full patient transparency, strict confidentiality, security clearance, access to her vitals labs, neuroimmunology scans, on-call availability, and one line he had specifically requested, under no circumstances shall the minor child of Dr. Sullivan be subject to visitation inquiry or media exposure. Rebecca noticed where his eyes paused. You're protective. She's 10. I'm not negotiating that. She exhaled. You realize I employ 3 publicists, 2 in-house attorneys, and a crisis team that monitors my brand in real time. Secrecy isn't a suggestion. It's survival. Then we understand each other. He signed with his own pen, ignoring the brass fountain pen she offered. As the ink dried, Rebecca watched him in silence, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some residual trace of heroism. But Michael didn't give her anything. No self-congratulation, no warmth, only professional neutrality. It was disarming in a world where everyone wanted something. That evening, Rebecca stared at his personnel file on her tablet alone in her penthouse suite overlooking Central Park. It wasn't enough. She wanted to know who he was, not just what he'd done. He was a mystery, a man who gave so little of himself it almost felt intentional. So she called in a favor. 10 minutes later, a secure file arrived from a private investigator who owed her 3 lives in a non-disclosure agreement. It was long, annotated, classified in parts. But the highlight, the first sharp jab to the chest, was his military medical citation: Lieutenant Colonel Michael Sullivan, U.S. Army, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for extreme valor and medical innovation under live fire, credited with pioneering mobile trauma response units during the Kandahar offensives. Dozens of lives saved, wounds stabilized under duress. Field protocols now standard across NATO operations. But deeper down in the file, the tone shifted. There was a section marked Personal History Redacted. She decrypted it using her internal keycard access. What she read next made her stomach twist. Name: Sarah Sullivan. Date of death: May 9th. Place of death: Memorial General Hospital. Cause: adverse drug interaction. Medication antagonist mislabeled as sedative. Attending physician: Michael Sullivan. There was a note attached, one line, cold and clinical. Doctor withdrew from surgical practice 28 days after incident. Rebecca placed the tablet down carefully, as if it might break under the weight of its content. He had tried to save her too, his own wife, and failed. But that wasn't the whole story. She read deeper. Michael had warned the hospital about potential drug interactions, 3 times according to records. His concerns were documented but ignored because they would have delayed the procedure. Then Sarah died. The next morning, Michael entered the clinical suite assigned to him on the 34th floor. It had everything he needed: smart displays, lab access, neural imaging tools, and a direct connection to Rebecca's biometric data. But the air felt different. She hadn't spoken to him since he signed the contract. Her assistants did the scheduling. The blood samples arrived on trays. There was no small talk. Not until that afternoon. She walked in without warning, no heels this time, just quiet steps and unreadable eyes. "You could have said no," she said, standing by the window. "I've said no many times, but you didn't this time." He paused, putting down a report. "Because your case interests me. Because you needed to be reminded what healing someone feels like." He looked at her sharply. "You read the file, I had to." Michael didn't respond, his hands clenched around the chair's edges. Rebecca didn't apologize. She didn't back away. Instead, she spoke softly. "Losing someone and still having the courage to keep helping others, that's not weakness. That's purpose. I'm not a hero, Ms. Blackwood. I'm a man who made a mistake he has to live with. So am I." They stood there, the city buzzing beneath them like a far-off memory. Neither trusted anymore, but something had shifted. Later that night, Michael sat on the floor of Emma's bedroom, folding laundry as she told him about her spelling bee. "You know," she said, "I looked her up. The woman you're helping." Michael raised a brow. "Did you?" "She's all over the news. People say she's cold. Some say she's brilliant. Some say both." "And what do you think?" Emma shrugged. "I think anyone who still shows up every day, even when people hate them, is probably braver than we think." Michael looked at her, heart quietly breaking in the best way. "You might be smarter than most adults." She grinned. "I know. The contract was signed, the boundaries were drawn. But in the shadows of pain and precision, 2 hearts, guarded by grief and hardened by the past, had just taken their first reluctant step towards something neither expected and something neither was ready to name. The city never truly slept, but it did pause between 2 and 4 a.m., when even taxi horns softened and skyscrapers blinked slower like titans, lulled into rest. Rebecca lay wide awake in her penthouse, sweat clinging to her collarbone despite the perfect temperature, her chest rising in shallow, unsteady breaths. Again, another nightmare. She stared at the ceiling, trying to grasp what had chased her this time. A war zone of shadows, a collapsing stage, faces without mouths screaming silently, and always in the middle of it all, herself watching but unable to move. For weeks since the incident, her body had improved. Tests were promising, motor responses better, nerve inflammation decreased. The doctors whispered about remission. But her nights were filled with echoes. At 3:07 a.m., barefoot in silk pajamas and a long cashmere robe, Rebecca moved through the 34th floor of Blackwood Tower like a ghost. No security, no assistant, just the hum of climate control and the soft buzz of refrigerated panels. She pushed open the door to the private medical suite. The lights were off, except for one reading lamp in the far corner. And there he was. Michael Sullivan, seated in an armchair beside the medical desk, legs crossed, a book in one hand and his phone in the other. The screen was angled just enough for her to see it wasn't a call. It was a video chat. On the screen, a little girl lay curled under floral sheets, a stuffed owl in her arms. And the paper dragon flew higher and higher. Michael read softly, voice low, patient, full of rhythm, until it realized it wasn't fire that made it dangerous. It was its heart that made it rare. Emma smiled sleepily, her eyes fluttering closed. "Night, Dad," she whispered. "Night, love," he replied. "You did great today." The screen dimmed. Michael closed the book. He turned his head and found Rebecca standing in the doorway, unmoving, expression unreadable. She didn't speak for a moment. Neither did he. Then she said, almost too quietly, "Was that the paper dragon?" He nodded. "It's her favorite. Sarah used to read it to her." Rebecca stepped inside slowly, arms crossed, as if hugging her own ribs. "I haven't heard that story since I was 10. Michael offered no reaction. He simply stood, setting the book down, clearing the table in silence. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I figured. The meds aren't responsible." "Nightmares, yes." He motioned to the chair across from his. "Sit." She hesitated, then obeyed. For a long moment, they sat there without words. Two people in a sterile room designed for survival, not comfort. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Nightmares aren't always about trauma. Sometimes they're just your body begging you to slow down." "Slowing down was never in the manual," Rebecca said dryly. "You wrote your own manual." She didn't laugh, but she didn't scowl either. "My father used to tell me that rest was indulgent," she said after a pause. "That sleep was for the safe, not for the strong." "Your father sounds like a general." "He was a surgeon, emotionally at least." That earned a faint knowing smile from him. Rebecca leaned back slightly, her voice softer now. "I've had everything. Private jets, Ivy League degrees, more homes than I can visit in a year. But for the first time, I don't know how to deal with the one thing I can't control, being afraid." Michael leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice grounded. "Fear is not weakness, it's a warning. The body's version of wisdom." She met his eyes. "And what if I ignore it, then it finds another way to remind you? Nightmares, panic, isolation, eventually illness." She lowered her gaze. "Maybe that's how I ended up here in the first place." Silence returned, but it wasn't cold. It had shifted, become shared, not imposed. "You're good with her," Rebecca said suddenly. Michael raised a brow. "Emma, the way you spoke to her, the way she smiled. You're raising her alone," he nodded. "I envy that." That surprised him. "You envy being a single parent?" "No. I envy having someone who looks at you like that, like you're the center of their world." She stood, wrapping the robe tighter around her frame. Her vulnerability was raw, but not fragile, just honest. "I should go," she murmured. Michael didn't stop her. But as she reached the door, she turned back. "That quote," she said, "the one about the dragon's heart. It's not in the original version," he smiled faintly. "I added it for Emma." Rebecca held his gaze. "I think you're not just helping me recover physically. I think your blood's doing something else too." Michael said nothing, his jaw tensed. "That's not science." "No," she said. "It's something more dangerous." Back in her suite, Rebecca sat on the edge of her bed and stared out at the city. The insomnia hadn't gone, but it had changed shape, become quieter, less lonely. She didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't fear the dark either. The Blackwood rooftop garden was a private oasis tucked between glass towers and humming air units. Rebecca had it built to remind herself there was still life above concrete. And now, for the first time in weeks, she invited someone else into it. Not Michael, his daughter. Emma sat across from Rebecca, legs swinging slightly, from the bench, cradling a cup of hot cocoa Rebecca had insisted be made, with 3 marshmallows, not 2. The girl was polite, poised, but didn't fidget like most children her age. There was an old soul in her eyes, like someone who had seen too much too early. "You don't have to say anything," Rebecca said gently. "I just thought we could talk." Emma looked at her thoughtfully. "Dad said I should only be here for 15 minutes. That's fair. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of leaves shifting in the wind above them. You're the lady he saved, Emma said suddenly. Rebecca blinked. Yes, I suppose I am. Emma didn't smile. Do you know what it cost him to save someone before? The question hung in the air like fog. Rebecca shook her head. No. Emma's eyes dropped to the steam rising from her cocoa. It cost him everything. Rebecca's throat tightened. You mean your mother? She was in the hospital. Not this one, a different one. Dad knew something was wrong. He warned them the meds could clash, that they weren't tested for her condition. He told them twice. They didn't listen. A beat. Then she died that same night. Amelia continued. He got angry, not like scary shouting, but like someone who'd lost a part of his soul. Rebecca leaned forward. What happened to him after that? They told him he overstepped, that he made the hospital look bad. So he left. Or maybe they made him leave, I don't know which. Emma looked up, now eyes sharp and wise beyond her years. So when he says no to helping you too much, it's not because he's mean. It's because he already gave too much once and no one gave anything back. Rebecca stood frozen in the elevator. She had excused herself calmly, even smiled at Emma, but inside her chest, thunder cracked. When the elevator doors opened, Michael was waiting outside the lab. His face was still. You went around me, he said flatly. You spoke to my daughter, I asked. She agreed, she's 10. You're the most powerful woman in the state. What part of that feels like consent to you? His voice didn't rise, but the force behind it was undeniable. I wasn't interrogating her. You were manipulating her. I wasn't, Rebecca said, stepping closer. She told me about your wife. That's not her story to tell. No, Michael. It's yours. But you never did. You treat me like a stranger holding a needle, but I'm the one who almost died. I deserve to know why the man who saved me can barely look me in the eye. His voice cracked this time. Because every time I do, I remember what it cost me to care. Rebecca faltered. The room swelled with unspoken truths. Pain clashed with pride, grief with guilt. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rebecca said quietly, I looked into it, into the records. You reported the interaction risk in the medication. 3 times. You logged everything. You were ignored. Michael closed his eyes. Rebecca, stop. You didn't lose your career because you were reckless. You lost it because you weren't it. Because no one wanted to admit they were wrong until it was too late. Michael's voice was a whisper now. I told them she had an autoimmune variant, that the immunosuppressants would shut her down if dosed together. But they didn't want delays. She was just another patient on a clock. His eyes opened, red-rimmed but blazing. And they killed her. Yes, he said. They did. Later that night, Rebecca sat alone in her study, surrounded by open case files and medical memos she had retrieved through private legal channels. Some were heavily redacted, others eerily clear. Her hands shook as she turned the final page, the autopsy notes. It was all there, dates, names, warnings filed, and ignored. She now held the truth that had haunted Michael in silence for years. He hadn't just been a doctor. He had been right. The next morning, Rebecca stood at the door of the guest apartment where Michael and Emma were staying on the Blackwood campus. She knocked. No response. She knocked again. The door opened slowly. Michael looked at her, exhausted, guarded. I didn't come to fight, Rebecca said. I came to apologize. He said nothing. I crossed a line, she admitted. I was so desperate to understand you, I forgot to respect the wall you built to protect what matters most. Still silence. I read it all, she added. Everything about Sarah, about the negligence. You weren't just a good doctor, Michael. You were a better one than most people deserved. He exhaled slowly. And I think you were right to walk away. But I also think maybe it's time someone actually listened. There was a pause. Then Michael opened the door wider, just enough for her to step inside. Coffee, he asked. No, Rebecca said with a hint of a smile. But I'd love a cup of Emma's cocoa. Michael allowed himself a breath of something that almost resembled peace. 3 marshmallows, he said. Rebecca nodded. Always. The message came just past noon, tucked between corporate memos and board meeting reminders on Rebecca's phone. A simple text sent from an unfamiliar number. Hi, Miss Rebecca. Tomorrow is my birthday. I didn't invite many people, but if you're not too busy, would you come, Emma? P.S. Dad doesn't know I'm texting you. Please don't be mad. Rebecca stared at the message longer than she should have. The corner of her mouth lifted soft, uncertain. It wasn't a corporate invitation sealed in gold. It wasn't a strategic alliance or a publicity stunt. It was an honest request, handwritten in digital ink, from a child who'd watched her father laugh far too rarely. And for once, Rebecca didn't think twice. The next evening, she arrived quietly holding a medium-sized box wrapped in blue tissue and tied with a string bow that took her an hour to figure out. She wore jeans, her assistant nearly fainted at the idea, and a simple navy sweater. No makeup, no security detail, just Rebecca. The neighborhood was unremarkable. A row of low-rent duplexes tucked between an elementary school and a tired strip mall. The kind of place no one expected to find the CEO of Blackwood Biotech wandering after dark. A middle-aged woman watering plants 2 doors down looked up and blinked in surprise. "You here for the birthday girl?" Rebecca smiled. "Yes, Emma." The woman squinted, then smiled wider. "You must be the new stepmom." Rebecca froze. The woman laughed. "She talks about you like you're a fairy godmother. You're lucky. Michael hasn't let anyone near her since, well, since Sarah." Rebecca's voice caught. I'm not, I'm just a friend." The woman gave her a knowing smile. "That's how it always starts." The apartment smelled of cinnamon and baked apples. Balloons with slightly deflated edges floated near the ceiling, and a hand-drawn sign that read "Happy 11th Emma" hung crookedly above the kitchen counter. Michael opened the door, surprised but not unkind. He wore a soft plaid shirt and jeans, his hair slightly tousled. "You got her message." "I did," Rebecca replied. "She's grounded for using my phone," he said dryly. "But not tonight," a voice chirped from behind him. Emma appeared dressed in a bright yellow dress, her grin stretching from ear to ear. She launched into a hug before Rebecca could even kneel down. "You came," the girl whispered, as if afraid saying it too loudly might make it untrue. "Of course I did," Rebecca replied, her throat tightening. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a store-bought cake decorated with plastic figurines from a cartoon Rebecca had never heard of. But it was the laughter that filled the room like a symphony. Michael made the worst dad jokes Rebecca had ever heard. Emma rolled her eyes dramatically. Rebecca, to her own shock, laughed, really laughed, until she had to wipe her eyes. At one point, she dropped her fork from sheer joy, and no one cared. They were a picture no one would have believed. A widowed ex-military medic, his bright-eyed daughter, and a billion-dollar CEO, all sitting at a wobbly kitchen table with paper napkins and mismatched plates. It was so normal it hurt. After cake, Michael got up to clean, and Emma pulled Rebecca aside, leading her into the living room, where family photos lined the wall above the fireplace. There, nestled between kindergarten art and a faded American flag, was a wedding portrait. Michael stood in full dress uniform, his arms wrapped around a woman with soft auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with laughter even in a still frame. Her gaze was locked on him, not the camera. And in that gaze was something Rebecca recognized not from her past, but from her longing. A kind of love that saw everything and stayed anyway. "She was beautiful," Rebecca whispered. Emma nodded solemnly. "She made up bedtime songs, and she could braid hair really fast." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "I bet she was amazing." "She was," the girl said with a small smile. "But sometimes I think Dad's been sad so long, he forgets how to be anything else." A beat passed. "You make him less sad." Rebecca looked down. "I don't know if that's true." "It is," Emma insisted. "When he talks about you, he gets all weird. Not like sad weird, more like he's remembering something he thought he lost." Later, as Michael walked her to the door, Rebecca hesitated on the threshold. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "For surviving my daughter's sugar high, for intruding on your life, for not understanding sooner." Michael leaned against the doorframe. "You brought a handmade gift, a grocery store cake, listened to Emma's stuffed animal opera. You're officially absolved." Rebecca chuckled, then turned serious. "She showed me the wedding photo." Michael's smile faded. "Sarah looked at you," Rebecca said softly, "like you were the only thing that mattered." He nodded slowly. "She was the center of everything." And now Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible. Michael didn't answer at first. Then in a voice that felt like gravel smoothed by rain, he said, "Now I'm trying to remember what life feels like when it's not about surviving." They stood in silence, two people tethered by shared brokenness in moments neither dared name. Rebecca finally stepped back. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for letting me be part of something real." Michael opened the door a little wider. "Maybe next time it won't take a secret text." Rebecca smiled, and for the first time it reached all the way to her eyes. Maybe next time. The boardroom was colder than usual, both in temperature and tone. Frosted glass wrapped the walls in a sterile hush, muting the city's rhythm beyond. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, her jaw, tight spine, upright, refusing to betray the tremor in her fingertips. Opposite her stood Dr. Harris Lynn, the newly appointed chief medical consultant for Blackwood Biotech, a man with credentials that stretched longer than most resumes, but with eyes that darted to the COO more often than they should. Daniel sat beside him, arms crossed, brow etched in deliberate concern. His tailored suit whispered quiet dominance, but his eyes burned with something else, frustration perhaps, or something older. "There's a risk," Harris said. "Repeated infusions of the same donor's blood, especially one with unidentifiable antibody anomalies, may cause cerebral inflammation. We're already seeing mild neurological echoes, irregular REM sleep, serotonin misfiring, early-stage memory compression." Rebecca stiffened. "You're saying my brain is breaking? I'm saying we don't fully understand what's happening yet," Harris replied cautiously. "And that continued exposure may accelerate cognitive damage." Daniel leaned in. "There's a cleaner way. Controlled, replicable, CRISPR. We can map Sullivan's antibody markers, isolate the mutation, and introduce it synthetically into your genome. Safely." "No," Rebecca said firmly. Harris blinked. "Ms. Blackwood, I said no," her voice sharpened like glass against stone. "CRISPR isn't stable. We don't fully understand its long-term effects, and I won't be someone's petri dish just to make things easier." Daniel exhaled hard through his nose. "This isn't about easier. It's about survival. You're playing roulette with your life, Rebecca." Her gaze snapped to his. "I've survived worse." The air turned leaden. Later in her private office, Rebecca poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands. The mention of her symptoms, subtle, buried, and unspoken until now, made her blood run colder than Harris's charts ever could. She'd noticed the changes, the sudden migraines, the flashes of déjà vu, the nights she woke up forgetting where she was. But she'd written them off as stress, as work, as Michael, as Emma, as feelings she didn't know how to name. But now it had a word damage. She stared at her reflection in the glass walls, then whispered aloud as if confessing to someone unseen. "What if the cure really is killing me?" The door opened without a knock. Daniel never had the courtesy for walls. "You're not invincible," he said, stepping inside. "I never claimed to be." "You used to think you were," he said with a bitter laugh. "When you walked away from our wedding with a 3-sentence email and a new headquarters lease in your hand." She didn't rise to the bait. "This isn't about us. The hell it's not." Daniel snapped. "I was going to build a life with you. You chose a company instead. Now you're building that same company on the blood of a broken man with a kid." Rebecca stood. "Don't you dare." His voice cracked. "I loved you, and I loved you enough not to drag you into the fire with me." Silence. He stepped closer. "Is that what Sullivan is now?" The new fire, she turned away, but the sting in her eyes betrayed her. "Michael is not anything to me. He saved my life, that's all. But now he's part of it," Daniel said softer. "More than I ever was." The words hung there unsaid but heard. "You never let me in, but you're letting him in." She didn't answer. Couldn't. He stepped back. "CRISPR is the future. Sullivan isn't. You need to choose." Meanwhile, Michael stood at the children's wing of St. Mary's Hospital, watching 2 young nurses wave goodbye to Emma after her routine checkup. She skipped toward him, her pink sneakers lighting up with every hop. "Guess what?" she chirped. "I drew a unicorn with 3 wings." The nurse said, "It's very expressive," he laughed. "That sounds about right." As they walked out, a man in a charcoal suit stepped in front of them. Tall, manicured, and radiating expensive impatience. "Mr. Sullivan," Daniel Foster said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Michael instinctively stepped in front of his daughter. Daniel Foster, COO of Blackwood Biotech, Rebecca's former fiancé. Daniel nodded, impressed. "I'm here to tell you off the record that your blood is endangering Rebecca's life. That continuing this little savior act of yours isn't heroism. It's recklessness." Michael narrowed his eyes. "She's not telling you because she thinks she can manage it," Daniel continued. But if she dies, her board will bury you. Her legacy will erase you. Michael's jaw tightened. Then maybe you should talk to her. Not threaten me. I already did, Daniel said, stepping closer. She won't listen to reason. But maybe you're the key. Michael glanced at Emma, whose grip on his hand had grown tighter. Stay away from us, he said, his voice low and steady. This isn't a war you want to start. Daniel didn't move. It already started the day she let you into her bloodstream. That night, Rebecca sat alone on the rooftop of Blackwood Tower city lights, shimmering below like constellations, trying to remind her the world was bigger than her body. Her fingers gripped the railing, white-knuckled. Her mind played back Harris's voice, Daniel's accusations, Michael's silence. She was unraveling, and she knew it. A soft ping broke the moment. A message from Michael. We need to talk tomorrow, just us. She replied without hesitation, yes. But in her heart, she wondered if just us would be enough against everything else that had already begun to fall apart. The flames painted the night in orange grief. By the time Rebecca screeched her car to a halt outside the modest house on Cedar Lane, smoke was already choking the air. A neighbor had rushed out with a garden hose, but the fire laughed at the water wild and feral inside. Through the flickering curtains, Rebecca could see shadows moving, tiny, frantic. Emma. Without hesitation, she sprinted forward, ignoring the screaming in her lungs. The front door was cracked open. She pushed through. The heat slapped her. Smoke clotted her eyes, but Rebecca didn't stop. Emma. Her voice barely penetrated the roar of flames consuming the living room wall. A faint cry answered from the hallway. Rebecca ducked low and stumbled forward, knees scraping, wood arms outstretched. Then small fingers trembling found her wrist. Emma's face was streaked with soot and tears coughing uncontrollably. I'm here, Rebecca whispered, wrapping her arms around the girl. I've got you. With every ounce of strength, she carried Emma toward the door, just as part of the ceiling gave way behind them, with a deafening crack. Fire licked at their heels as they burst outside, collapsing into the cold grass. Michael's car screeched in from the corner gravel, spitting beneath his tires. He barely stopped before leaping out. Emma, his voice shattered against the night. She ran into his arms, still coughing, still shaking. He held her so tightly it seemed he might never let go. Rebecca sat frozen on the lawn, her chest heaving. Her blazer was scorched, her palms blistered. But her eyes never left Michael. The raw terror on his face mirrored something she'd never allowed herself to feel. The fear of losing everything that mattered. The next morning, what remained of the house was a smoldering skeleton. Blackened beams, charred memories. Years of grief and quiet healing turned to ash in one careless night. The fire department had ruled it an electrical accident. Faulty wiring, they said. Outdated sockets, maybe a power surge. But Michael wasn't buying it. Not after he'd rewired that house himself when they'd first moved in. Not after a neighbor mentioned seeing a man in a dark coat outside the night before pacing like he didn't belong. Not after what Daniel had said. Michael stared at the ruins, Emma clutching his hand, her head resting against his hip. Her backpack contained all they had left, the stuffed owl, a photo album, and clothes Rebecca had bought her on the way to a hotel last night. You're not safe here, Rebecca said quietly, standing beside him. I know. You can move into the Blackwood compound. Full security, private floor guards. No one touches you. Michael shook his head. No. You nearly lost your daughter, Michael. He turned to her, then his voice rough. Because of me. Because I got too close to a world that doesn't know how to love without destroying things. Rebecca flinched. Michael looked away, jaw tight. You think this was random? That it's coincidence the fire happened 2 days after your ex threatened me? She didn't answer. Tell me you know this wasn't just some fuse. She stayed silent. He nodded once. Exactly. A moment passed, then he said, We're leaving today. Rebecca stepped closer. Don't. I have to. Michael, you're the only reason I'm alive, and Emma's the only reason I still live. I won't let her become collateral damage in a war I never asked to fight. Her voice cracked. You're not just some donor. He looked at her, eyes clouded. Rebecca, I was never just a donor, and you know it. That afternoon, the sun burned down on a silent parking lot outside a long-term motel 2 towns over. Michael stood with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Emma waited by the open car door, her stuffed unicorn poking out of her backpack. Rebecca had come not to argue, not to plead, just to see. She watched as Michael handed the motel clerk a credit card, watched the way he glanced back at Emma every few seconds, protective instincts always humming. "You don't belong here," she said finally. "I don't belong there either," he replied. Her voice was soft. "You belong with people who see you for who you are." Michael turned to her, expression unreadable. "And what do you see?" she swallowed. "A man who's still grieving, still running, but also the only man who didn't walk away when I was at my worst." He looked down as if the words stung more than soot in a wound. She stepped forward, pressed a small folder into his hands. "What is this backups? Every drop of your medical research, all the lab notes mapped antibody analyses, everything we learned while you treated me. Keep it. Start over if you want." He opened the folder, slightly scanning the pages. His breath caught. "You shouldn't have." "I needed to," she interrupted. "Because I may be your patient, Michael, but I'm not your chain. I won't hold you back." Michael blinked hard. "Promise me something." "What?" Her voice shook. "If I relapse again, don't come back out of guilt. Only come back if your heart tells you to." A long silence. Then Michael did something unexpected. He stepped forward, gently cupped her cheek, and whispered, "If I come back, it'll be because I can't stay away." Then he walked away. 2 weeks later, Rebecca collapsed. It happened during a routine investor dinner at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. One moment she was smiling, poised as ever, delivering a toast to Blackwood Biotech's newest partnership. The next, her words slurred, her hand trembled, and her legs gave way. She was unconscious before the ambulance arrived. By the time Harris reviewed the test results, his hands were shaking. "The neurological regression is accelerating," he said grimly to the board members gathered outside her hospital room. "Without Sullivan's antibodies, she doesn't have more than 10 days. Daniel's face paled. "You said CRISPR could work." A board member barked. It was a theory, and she refused it. Daniel stared at the floor, jaw clenched. No one spoke the obvious. She chose Michael over science. And now she was dying for it. But in the quiet room, a phone began to ring. And far from the city, in a motel room filled with too many ghosts, Michael stared at the caller ID, St. Mary's Medical. He didn't answer. Not yet. Michael sat by the hospital bed, arms folded tightly across his chest. The beep of monitors in the room behind him marked Rebecca's life in cold, unrelenting rhythm. He hadn't gone inside, not once. Instead, he stared at the tiled floor of the waiting room, as if he could vanish into it. "Dr. Sullivan," a nurse whispered, handing him a clipboard. "They're asking again, just for a signature." He took it without speaking, signed blindly, and handed it back. Paperwork meant nothing when you had already lost what mattered. "She's awake," the nurse added gently. Michael didn't look up. "That doesn't change anything." When Rebecca opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the sterile ceiling. The second was her own hand, a V-line taped to her wrist, trembling with weakness. And the third was the empty chair by her bedside. He hadn't come. Harris entered with a soft knock, his voice low. "Vitals are holding, but barely. The blood transfusion bought us hours, not days. He's refused to see you." Rebecca's lips were dry. "Where is he?" "He's still in the hospital. Just not here." She nodded slowly. Emotion shuddered behind tired eyes. "Then I'll go to him. Miss Blackwood, you're not—" "I wasn't asking permission." Michael didn't flinch when Rebecca stepped into the family consultation room. His gaze stayed on the window, blank and gray with drizzle. "You should be resting," he said flatly. "I'll rest when I'm not dying." A beat, then another. Michael stood. "You're stronger than this. Don't flatter me. You've made it clear what you want. You think this is what I want." His voice cracked open, raw, afraid. "You almost died." "My blood's no cure. It's a chain. I chose that chain," Rebecca snapped, "because it gave me more than just time. It gave me clarity." Michael looked away. Rebecca's voice softened. "Do you know what I saw the night of the fire? I saw a father break open at the thought of losing his child. And then I saw that same man build a wall so fast around himself no one could reach him again." He said nothing. "You're not punishing me, Michael. You're punishing yourself." He finally looked at her, then eyes full of grief and something deeper. "Because I failed. My wife died in a hospital just like this one. And I was there. I did everything right. And it wasn't enough. She wasn't your failure. She was my everything." A long pause fell between them, and then quietly Rebecca said, "Let me speak to Emma." They met on the rooftop garden, an old helipad turned quiet sanctuary. The sky hung low, bruised with storm clouds. but the rain held back as if waiting for permission. Emma sat on the bench in her school jacket, swinging her feet nervously. "I'm sorry I dragged you into all this," Rebecca began. Emma shook her head. "I invited you, remember?" They shared a small, sad smile. "He used to smile more," Emma whispered, "before Mom died. He read bedtime stories with funny voices, danced in the kitchen." Rebecca looked at her. "Do you miss that version of him?" Emma nodded. "Sometimes I think he left with her, the part of him that loved the world." Rebecca's voice was soft. "He still loves the world. He just loves it quietly now." Emma hesitated. "You make him afraid." Rebecca blinked. "What?" "Not in a bad way," the girl clarified. "It's just, if he cares about someone again, it means he can lose again." Those words hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. Emma tilted her head. "But maybe that's the only way he heals. Loving again." Rebecca swallowed hard. Emma slipped her a folded piece of paper. "He wrote this last night. I found it in his jacket. He didn't send it." Rebecca opened it. It was addressed to Sarah. "My dearest S. I keep hearing your laugh when Emma leaves socks in the fridge again. You'd roll your eyes and say, 'She's your daughter, you know.' And you'd be right. I failed you, not because you died. I know death isn't something even the best doctors can outrun. I failed you because I stopped living after you were gone. I thought grief was loyalty. But now I wonder if love, true love, asks for more than silence and shadow. There's someone. She's complicated, strong. The kind of strong that makes you want to be bitter, not just for her, but for yourself. And I hate that I care, because caring means risking again. But not caring, bomb, it's not life. It's just survival. I miss you, S. I'll always love you. But maybe the best way to honor your love is to not die with you. Yours always, Michael." That night, Rebecca sat alone in her hospital room, holding the letter in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew now he wasn't gone. Not really. His heart had just been waiting for permission. And maybe, just maybe, it had come from the only voice he'd never stopped listening to. His own. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Tower hadn't seen this many cameras in years. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder beneath glittering chandeliers, their lenses trained on the sleek steel podium at the center of the stage. On the massive digital screen behind it, bold white letters blazed. "Breakthrough in genetic therapy. Blackwood unveils the future." Daniel Foster stood tall, tailored to perfection, his smile clinical and triumphant. As chief operating officer, he was no stranger to attention. But today was different. Today he intended to make headlines that would last generations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, a voice amplified and crisp. "What we present today is not just a treatment. It is a revolution." Slides flicked behind him. DNA strands, neural mapping graphs charting cellular repair. The audience nodded, some visibly impressed. Daniel paused just long enough to let the buzz grow. "Our CRISPR-based protocol has passed preclinical simulations, and with the board's approval, we begin human trials next quarter, starting naturally with our own CEO." Polite applause followed, but Rebecca didn't move. Daniel leaned closer to the mic, adding, "We believe this therapy will render prior experimental interventions obsolete, including, unfortunately, the unconventional plasma-based protocol some of you may have heard about." There it was, the veiled attack. Rebecca stood. Cameras snapped to attention. Daniel looked at her, startled. "I'm afraid I can't support this announcement," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The room froze. Murmurs rippled across the media pit. Daniel blinked. "Rebecca, we've discussed. I'm still CEO Daniel, and I have something to say." She stepped to the podium, her heels echoing like war drums. When she looked out into the sea of faces, her spine was straight, her expression unreadable. "I've been fighting a rare degenerative disease for over a year," she began. "Many of you know that. What you don't know is how close I came to dying. Not once, but multiple times." She glanced toward the back of the room. "No, Michael." But she continued. "There was no cure, no trial, no miracle drug. There was only one thing that gave me time. A blood transfusion from a man who never asked to be in the spotlight. A man who once served this country, lost his wife in a hospital that failed her, and still found it in his heart to save a stranger." The silence was absolute now. "I offered him $10 million, Rebecca said. He refused. Not once, not twice. Every time. Because some things you don't put a price tag on. Daniel stepped forward, face tightening. Rebecca, with all due respect, personal anecdotes are not policy. We are a biotech firm. We deal in facts. Then let me give you one, Rebecca said, turning toward the audience again. The man who saved my life, Michael Sullivan, is the same doctor who 5 years ago filed a report warning of a drug interaction that led to the death of his wife. A report that was ignored by a hospital board seeking faster approvals. The room exploded. Reporters shouted over each other. Microphones lunged forward. One journalist stood up with a tablet in hand. Is it true the case was buried? Rebecca nodded. Until last week when I reopened the investigation. And now, she continued, her voice rising above the noise, the evidence has cleared his name. He didn't fail her. The system did. Flashbulbs popped. Silence again. Then applause. Slow at first, then rising. Daniel's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Rebecca stepped back, breathing unevenly. Not from sickness, but release. 5 years of injustice undone in 5 minutes. Later, in the quiet of her office, Rebecca sat by the window overlooking the city. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the sheer emotional weight of what had just unfolded. The door opened softly behind her. She didn't turn. I didn't think you'd come, she said. Michael's voice came low, gentle. Neither did I. He stood behind her in silence for a moment. You didn't have to defend me like that. I wasn't defending you, Rebecca said, still facing the skyline. I was defending truth. A pause. I thought you'd hate me, she whispered, for turning it all public. He stepped closer. You gave me back something I didn't think I deserved. She turned to face him, eyes searching his. What's that? He hesitated. A voice. For the first time in days, she smiled. It was small but real. You gave me more than that, Michael. You gave me breath, a chance to feel alive again. I didn't want anything in return. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it mean everything. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time the walls around him began to crack. I didn't come here to be your hero, Rebecca. I didn't need one, she replied. I needed someone who saw me when I stopped seeing myself. Silence wrapped around them, warm and full. Then Michael asked, what happens now? Rebecca looked out at the city again. Now we keep going. And maybe this time, not alone. Outside, the media still buzzed with the story of the man who refused 10 million. But inside that room, something far greater had been earned. Respect, redemption, and the fragile beginnings of something that didn't yet have a name, but was real. And that more than any press release would last. The rain began sometime after midnight. It wasn't a gentle lullaby of water on rooftops. It was a furious, urgent downpour pounding against hospital windows, like the fists of a world refusing to sleep. The ER lights buzzed under pressure. Nurses moved quickly, voices clipped and trembling with urgency. Michael Sullivan stood frozen in the doorway of Emma's room, his military calm cracking with each second that passed. His daughter was seizing. Her small body, so full of life and laughter, now lay limp on the gurney. Her skin pale and clammy lips tinged blue. The doctors shouted orders. The monitors blared red. The attending's voice was sharp, precise. We need blood. O negative. Cross-match failed. Platelets are collapsing. Michael tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. I can give mine. You already have, the doctor cut in. She's built antibodies after repeated transfusions over the years. We can't risk another. Michael gripped the edge of the doorway. Then find someone. We're trying. But the clock was louder than hope. Then the doors burst open. Dripping wet, her designer coat soaked through heels, echoing with unrelenting resolve, Rebecca Blackwood strode in like a storm sent from the gods. I'm O negative, she said. The nurse hesitated. Miss Blackwood, your condition. I said, take it, Rebecca snapped, unbuttoning her sleeve. Now, Michael turned, stunned. Rebecca, no. Your immune system's still weak. She looked at him, not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a woman who had chosen her fight. She's your daughter, she said quietly, which means she's part of my life too. And without waiting for his permission, she offered her arm. The nurse moved quickly. The blood bag filled, slowly red against glass, thick with silent sacrifice. 2 hours later, the storm outside had dulled to a steady hush. But inside the ICU, the true storm had just passed. Emma's vitals stabilized. The fever broke. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, even rhythm. She was safe. But Rebecca wasn't. Michael sat at her bedside, the IV drip hissing softly beside her face too pale for comfort. She looked like she was sleeping, but her breath was shallow, her lips dry. The doctor entered, hesitant. She collapsed from acute blood volume depletion. Her levels were already borderline. She shouldn't have stood up, let alone donated. Michael stared at Rebecca, his throat tightened. The doctor added, "But she may have just saved your daughter's life." The moment the doctor left, Michael reached for Rebecca's hand, cold, delicate. He'd seen men bleed out in war zones. He'd seen heroes fall with medals on their chests and fear in their eyes. But this was different. This wasn't duty. It wasn't protocol. This was love. Quiet, reckless, and entirely undeserved. A tear escaped his eye. It burned on his cheek like confession. "You weren't supposed to do this," he whispered. "You're not supposed to risk you." Rebecca stirred faintly. He leaned closer. "You said no one saw you," he whispered. "But I do. I see everything now. Not the CEO, not the public face, but the woman who walked through fire for a child who wasn't hers." Her lips parted, barely a breath. "She is." Michael froze. Rebecca opened her eyes slowly. "She is mine too." He exhaled shakily, overcome. "You could have died, you would have," she replied. And just like that, the storm inside him shattered. Michael bowed his head, forehead resting against her hand, silent tears running into her skin. In all his years of war, of loss, of surgeries done in tents and triage units, he'd never cried like this. Because it wasn't just about saving Emma. It was about someone choosing to save her, someone choosing him. Later that morning, as dawn peeked through the storm clouds, Emma woke to find her father asleep in a chair beside Rebecca's bed, their hands still intertwined. She tiptoed into the room wrapped in a hospital blanket. She paused at the doorway watching them. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just smiled. Because even a child could see what two broken adults could not. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of healing, together. The sun had barely risen when Michael knocked on Rebecca's door. No fanfare, no entourage, just him, in a soft gray sweater, worn jeans, and that same quiet gravity that always made the noise of the world seem to hush around him. Rebecca opened the door, her face still pale, but her eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "Get dressed," he said gently. "I want to show you something." The drive was quiet, scenic. He didn't say where they were going, and she didn't ask. It was the first time in years she had allowed herself to surrender, not to a man, but to a moment. They stopped near a quiet beach, still slick from the recent rains. The waves were gentle, brushing the sand with the kind of grace that only time could perfect. Rebecca stepped out, barefoot, letting the sea wind tangle her hair. Michael walked beside her, close, but not touching. The silence between them was rich. Not awkward, not empty, but full of all the things that didn't need to be said. "You used to come here," she asked. He nodded. "Before Emma, for the war, when I still believed that fixing things meant they stayed fixed." A small laugh escaped her lips. "And now I know some things break to make room for something better." She turned to him, suddenly serious. "Why did you really bring me here?" Michael exhaled, searching her face as if memorizing it. "Because I needed you to see where I made a promise once, and I want to make another." Her heart thudded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple seashell, smooth white, unremarkable. But in his hand it looked sacred. "When I was stationed overseas," he began, "every time I thought I wouldn't make it back, I'd imagine this place, this sound. The ocean doesn't demand anything from you. It just keeps going. No matter who leaves." He took her hand gently, reverently. "If you make it through this, if we're still standing when this war is over, I want to marry you, Rebecca." The waves paused for her answer. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just smiled, small, quiet, and true. "No one's ever chosen me," she whispered. "Not without knowing what I could give in return. Not without strings." Michael's voice dropped. "I'm not here for your empire. I'm here because you walked into a burning house to save my daughter. I'm here because you make me feel like I still have something left to fight for. And because when you're not in the room, nothing else makes sense anymore." She leaned her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the salty air. "You're insane," she said softly. "And yet here you are. Back in the hospital 2 days later, the final round of tests came in. Dr. Harris, who had overseen Rebecca's condition, stood at the edge of her bed with a look somewhere between astonishment and disbelief. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "Your body's no longer responding to Michael's antibodies, which is a good thing." Michael stiffened. "You mean it's rejecting them?" Harris replied, holding up the chart. "I mean it's not needing them anymore. Your immune system, it's evolved, adapted. The antibodies your body developed have compensated for the deficiency. In medical terms, you've stabilized." Rebecca blinked, stunned. "You're saying you're in remission," the doctor said with a soft smile. "Maybe even cured. And it happened faster than we've ever documented in a patient with your condition." Michael looked at her, eyes wide. Rebecca was speechless. Harris continued, closing the chart. "Sometimes the body just decides it wants to live." The room was silent as he left, leaving the weight of those words hanging in the air, like a miracle too fragile to name. That night, as the city lights flickered beneath the hospital window, Rebecca stood beside Michael with her arms crossed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what? Of living like this isn't temporary. Of hoping." Michael turned to her, placing his hand over her heart. "You've survived boardrooms, lawsuits, betrayal, a failing body. You think hope is where you draw the line?" She laughed, this time with her whole chest. Then she reached up, brushing her fingers against the side of his face. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. When you propose again, do it on a day that isn't soaked in needles and test results." He smiled. "Deal. But Michael, yeah." She leaned in, resting her head against his chest, eyes closed. "I already said yes." The ocean still waited for them, and this time when they returned, they would walk not as strangers who saved each other, but as two people who had learned the most powerful truth of all. Love isn't meant to be logical. It's meant to be real. The attic was dusty, quiet, and soaked in golden afternoon light slanting through the narrow window. Michael knelt beside an old cedar chest, the kind that still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Emma sat cross-legged next to him, her small hands brushing dust from the lid. "You sure you want to open it now, Dad?" Michael hesitated. The chest hadn't been opened since the funeral, maybe not even since before the diagnosis. But something in Rebecca's near death, something in the way she had given her blood without hesitation to save Emma, had unsealed more than a debt. It had unsealed his heart. He nodded, lifting the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved in neat bundles wrapped with ribbon, were letters. Dozens of them, some yellowed, some crisp, some written in thick marker with silly hearts, others in delicate cursive. Emma reached for the top one. "To you for someday," she read aloud and handed it to her father. Michael unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. He instantly recognized Sarah's handwriting, steady and elegant, like the woman herself. He read in silence, his eyes moving slowly across every word, his heart catching in his throat. "Michael, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm not there anymore, which breaks me to even imagine. But if you are, I hope you're sitting in sunlight. I hope Emma is nearby. And I hope you haven't let the world close your heart forever. If you found someone new, and I pray that you have loved her the way you loved me, fully, fearlessly, don't hold back. I know how loyal you are, but loyalty doesn't mean building a shrine to the past. It means honoring the love we had by living. And if she ever doubts how deeply you can love, tell her. Tell her you once loved a woman so much you stayed up every night for weeks, memorizing the rhythm of her breathing, afraid it might stop. Tell her you held her hand through pain so bad it blurred the edges of her world, and you never once let go. Tell her you were a soldier, a healer, a husband, and that you are still all three. If you still have the ring, give it to her, or better yet, give her a new one that says, I choose you now fully, because love is not a second chance. It's another beginning. Always yours, Sarah. Michael didn't move. His breath caught on something too old and too sacred to name. His chest ached, but not with sorrow. It ached with peace. That night, he pulled out a tiny velvet box he'd hidden for months. Not the old ring, though he'd kept that too tucked safely in his wallet like a relic. This was new. A simple platinum band with a small diamond set low and strong. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but it felt like her. Rebecca. Solid, radiant, quietly powerful. Emma looked up from the edge of the bed where she sat in pajamas. Is that for Rebecca? Michael nodded. His daughter smiled. I think Mom would be proud. I hope so. She paused, then added, she told me once right before the hospital that if anything happened, I had to remind you, you're allowed to live again. I just didn't know what she meant until I saw you with Rebecca. Michael swallowed the lump in his throat. Thank you for reminding me. The next morning, Michael stood outside the Blackwood building. A familiar ache twisted in his gut, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. He entered through the service door the same way he had the first time back when he was just the anonymous donor, the reluctant savior. Now every step felt lighter, more sure. Rebecca's office was quiet when he arrived. She sat alone at the massive window, sunlight streaming through the glass, casting long shadows across the floor. She turned when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes met, and in that moment nothing needed to be said. Still, Michael reached into his coat pocket and held out the box. Rebecca blinked. Is that? He opened it slowly, revealing the ring. I read a letter yesterday, he said, voice thick with emotion. From Sarah. Rebecca's eyes softened. She said, love isn't about replacing the past. It's about choosing the present fully. And Rebecca, I'm choosing you. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she stood, walked over, and took his hand. I thought I knew what power meant, she whispered. Contracts, boardrooms, empires. But it's this, right now. Knowing someone sees you, all of you, and still chooses you. Michael slid the ring onto her finger. I don't know where life will take us, he said, but I want to walk there beside you. She smiled. Then let's start walking. Outside, the city moved as it always did, fast, loud, relentless. But inside that office, two people stood still, holding hands, holding a future. A past had finally been honored, and a new chapter, not just of healing but of hope, had begun. The garden had changed over the years, but not in the ways that mattered. The same old oak tree still spread its arms like a sentinel. The flower beds, lovingly tended by nurses and volunteers, bloomed with late spring roses, tulips, and morning glories. A small wooden bench faded by sun, and time stood under the pergola, quiet, dignified, as if remembering the woman who once sat there every evening, waiting for a miracle that never came. Today, it would witness a different kind of miracle. A white aisle had been woven between the flower beds. Folding chairs lined both sides, filled with quiet onlookers, nurses, doctors, friends, and people whose lives had somehow brushed against Michael's or Rebecca's. Even the janitor, who once helped Michael with his ID badge, sat respectfully in the back, wearing his Sunday best. At the far end of the aisle, Michael stood in a tailored navy suit, his military posture softened by a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Beside him, Emma adjusted the boutonniere on his lapel, her hands calm and precise. You look nervous, she teased. I'm not. Liar. But you look happy. He bent and kissed the top of her head. That I am. Music began, soft piano notes drifting through the garden speakers. Then all heads turned. Rebecca stepped into view. She wore a simple, elegant white gown off the shoulder, flowing with lace details that caught the sunlight like dew on petals. Her hair fell in soft waves, and in her eyes glowed something no business empire, no contract, no fortune could ever buy. Peace. On her arm stood William Blackwood, her father, still tall, still formidable, but now with tears shining unashamedly in his eyes. As they walked slowly down the aisle, Rebecca whispered, You sure you're ready to give me away? William gave her hand a gentle squeeze. I'm not giving you away, he murmured. I'm handing you to someone who deserves you. When they reached the end, William looked at Michael, not with the cold scrutiny of a CEO vetting an applicant, but with the weary gratitude of a father whose daughter had finally been saved. Not by science, but by something stronger. He placed Rebecca's hand into Michael's and whispered, Take care of my little girl. I already am, Michael replied. The officiant's voice faded as Emma stepped forward, a folded paper in her hands. She stood in front of the small crowd, cleared her throat, and began. When I was little, I thought miracles only happened in labs. I used to think love was just another thing that gets taken away when people get sick or hurt. But then something happened. A woman I didn't know gave her blood for me, and a man I've known my whole life gave his heart to someone new. Today isn't about a perfect wedding. It's about two people who walked through fire, who lost everything, and still chose to believe. There are miracles science can't explain, like a CEO giving up power for love, or a soldier learning to smile again. My dad once told me the bravest thing you can do is love again after losing everything. So here's to brave love. Here's to choosing kindness over control. And here's to the kind of miracle that starts not in a lab but in someone's heart. She stepped back, her voice trembling but proud. The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words lingering like sunlight after rain. Rebecca turned to Michael. I thought I needed a cure, she said, her voice breaking. But what I really needed was someone who saw me. Not as a CEO, not as a patient, but just me. Michael took her hand. You were never broken, Rebecca. You were just tired of holding everything alone. They exchanged vows, simple, heartfelt. Rebecca's I vow to never hide behind numbers and headlines again. I vow to love not from behind walls, but with open hands. Michael's I vow to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind. To protect, to laugh, to listen. And to remind you every day that you are not alone. Then came the ring. Michael slipped it on her finger just like the promise he'd made by that hospital bed not long ago. The crowd erupted in quiet, joyful applause. From a distance behind the stone trellis, a solitary figure stood watching. Daniel, his suit sharp, his expression unreadable. But when Rebecca smiled at Michael, genuine, radiant, unguarded, Daniel closed his eyes for a beat, then turned and walked away. No bitterness, just acceptance. Because some stories aren't about winning back what was lost, but letting go so something better can begin. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, guests began to scatter. Laughter bubbled in quiet corners. Children played tag near the rose beds. Someone turned on soft jazz near the refreshment table. Rebecca sat with Michael beneath the old oak tree where once he had held his grief. Now he held her hand. Emma ran toward them, her dress stained with cake and joy. Come dance with me, she called. Michael stood, pulled Rebecca up with him. We're terrible dancers, he whispered. I don't care, Rebecca laughed. Neither did he. In that garden where once sorrow had bloomed, joy finally took root. And in the simplest of vows whispered not just before witnesses, but before the past itself, a new chapter began. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Michael Sullivan stood in a university auditorium watching his daughter accept her white coat. Emma, now 14, had decided to follow in both her parents' footsteps, her mother's dedication to healing her father's hands-on approach to medicine. The ceremony marked her entrance into a specialized medical high school program, the first step toward her dream. Rebecca sat beside him, clutching a program with Emma's name highlighted. I still can't believe she's old enough for this, she whispered. Michael squeezed her hand. She grew up too fast. Just like her father, Rebecca replied with a smile. When Emma's name was called, she walked across the stage with the same quiet confidence Michael had always admired. The white coat settled on her shoulders like a mantle of purpose. In that moment, Michael saw Sarah's smile and his daughters heard her laugh in Emma's. But the determination, the fierce intelligence behind those eyes, that was all Emma. After the ceremony, as they navigated through crowds of proud families, Emma ran to them, coat flapping behind her. I got assigned a mentor already, she announced breathlessly. Dr. Rivera, she's head of hematology research. Rebecca hugged her. That's wonderful, sweetheart. When do you start next week? And she said she wants to talk to you both about something called Lifeblood Initiative. Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances. What's that? Michael asked. Emma shrugged. Something about expanding blood donation awareness for rare blood types. I don't know yet, but I told her about what happened with us. That night, as they drove home, Rebecca turned to Michael. Lifeblood Initiative, she said thoughtfully. It has a ring to it. Michael nodded. It does. What if we did something with that? Something that goes beyond your antibodies and my recovery. He looked at her, seeing the familiar spark in her eyes, the one that had built empires and changed industries. I'm listening. Dr. Camila Rivera wasn't what they expected. Young, brilliant, with an intensity that reminded Rebecca of herself 20 years ago. She welcomed them into her lab, a state-of-the-art facility funded by a research grant from a consortium of hospitals. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to chairs around a conference table. Emma has told me your story. It's remarkable. Michael shifted uncomfortably. It was just blood donation. Dr. Rivera smiled. No, Dr. Sullivan, it was much more. She opened a file on her tablet. Your antibodies have a rare structure, one I've only seen in a handful of cases worldwide. They contain a unique protein marker that essentially acts as a master key to the immune system. She pulled up diagrams on a large screen. These markers can adapt to host systems in ways we don't fully understand yet. In Rebecca's case, her autoimmune condition was essentially reprogrammed. And you want to study this, Rebecca concluded. I want to do more than study it, de Rivera leaned forward. I want to replicate it, create a synthetic version that could help thousands with similar conditions. But to do that, I need more data, more samples, and your help in building a network of rare blood donors. Rebecca felt the familiar excitement of a new challenge. This isn't just about science, is it? The younger doctor's eyes lit up. It's about changing how we approach medicine, moving away from the industrial model towards something more human. The Lifeblood Initiative was born that afternoon, a partnership between Blackwood Biotech's resources and Dr. Rivera's research with a mission that transcended profit margins, building the world's most comprehensive database of rare blood donors and recipients, studying the miracle that had saved Rebecca, and making it accessible to others. 6 months later, in a renovated wing of St. Mary's Hospital, the first Lifeblood Hope Center opened its doors. Clean, welcoming, with none of the clinical sterility of traditional donation centers. Photos lined the walls, donors and recipients, their stories printed beneath in simple text. At the entrance, a young boy sat nervously in the waiting area, no more than 12, with skin pale from too many hospital stays. His mother beside him clutching paperwork. Michael approached them first. "Hello," he said gently, kneeling to the boy's eye level. "I'm Dr. Sullivan. You must be Marcus." The boy nodded, eyes wide. "Mom says you have special blood." Michael smiled. "Not special, just different, like yours." Marcus looked at his sneakers. "They say I need a lot of transfusions. That normal blood doesn't work right for me." "I know. That's why we're here, to find the right match. Sometimes our bodies are like puzzles. We just need the right piece." Rebecca joined them, introducing herself not as CEO of Blackwood, but simply as Rebecca. "Do you like ice cream, Marcus?" she asked. The boy nodded. "There's a place down the street that makes the best chocolate chip. Maybe after your test we could all go." For the first time, Marcus smiled. His mother mouthed a silent "thank you" over his head. That afternoon, as they sat in the ice cream parlor, watching Marcus devour a cone bigger than his face, Rebecca leaned against Michael's shoulder. "He reminds me of Emma at that age," she said softly. "So brave, so uncertain." Michael nodded. "If we can help him, it's worth everything. All the paperwork, all the red tape." Rebecca watched the boy laugh at something Emma said. The two had bonded immediately, Emma taking on the role of big sister with natural ease. "This is it, isn't it?" Rebecca whispered. "This is what we're building. Not just a medical breakthrough, but a community." Michael kissed her temple. "One drop at a time." The results came in 3 days later. Marcus's blood contained a rare antigen configuration that made typical transfusions ineffective. But in the Lifeblood database, a match appeared. A donor from Seattle with a similar profile to Michael's. The first transfusion went smoothly. The boy's pallor improved within hours. His energy returned like a light switched back on. 2 months later, when he returned for a follow-up, he ran into the center instead of being wheeled in. "Look, Dr. Sullivan," he called, showing off a new backpack covered in superhero pins. "I started school again." Michael high-fived him, something warm and fiercely protective flooding his chest. "Amazing. How's it going?" "They're all jealous of my cool medical stories," Marcus grinned. "I told them I have a superhero doctor who saved me with magic blood." Rebecca, overhearing, tried not to laugh. "You did not tell them that." Marcus shrugged. "Well, maybe not the magic part, but the superhero part is true." As the boy bounced off to his checkup with Dr. Rivera, Rebecca slid her arm around Michael's waist. "He's doing so well." Michael watched the boy disappear down the corridor. It's not just the transfusions. It's knowing he's not alone, that someone understands. Rebecca rested her head against his shoulder. "Like someone once did for me." The success stories accumulated. A young mother with a rare blood disorder able to see her son's first birthday. An elderly man whose autoimmune disease had defied treatment for decades suddenly in remission. A college athlete whose career-ending condition stabilized enough for her to compete again. With each case, the Lifeblood database grew. Donors came forward inspired by the stories. Scientists contributed research. Hospitals around the country began sending their most puzzling cases. 1 year into the initiative, Dr. Rivera presented her findings at the American Medical Association's annual conference. Michael and Rebecca sat in the front row as she unveiled the data that would change thousands of lives. What we're discovering, she explained, isn't just about blood types or antibodies. It's about the fundamental way our bodies recognize and respond to each other at a cellular level. These rare donors, she gestured to a slide showing complex protein chains. Their blood contains markers that essentially speak the universal language of healing. In the Q&A that followed, a doctor from Johns Hopkins stood. "This is revolutionary work," he acknowledged. "But isn't this just another way of saying that some people are biologically superior donors?" Dr. Rivera shook her head. "Not superior. Different. And the difference matters only because of context. Dr. Sullivan's blood saved Ms. Blackwood because her specific condition created the perfect environment for his antibodies to work. In another patient, it might have had no effect at all." She advanced to a new slide. "This is why the network is so crucial. It's not about finding one miracle donor. It's about creating a living, responsive system that matches the right donor to the right recipient at the right time." "The implications are staggering," another researcher commented. "This could completely change how we approach transplantation, autoimmune disorders, even cancer treatment." Dr. Rivera smiled. "That's exactly what we're hoping for." After the presentation, as the auditorium emptied, Michael found Rebecca staring at the projection screen, lost in thought. "What is it?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I collapsed in that boardroom 5 years ago, I thought it was the end of everything I'd built, that my legacy would be an unfinished quarterly report." She gestured toward Dr. Rivera, now surrounded by enthusiastic colleagues. "And now look, we're changing medicine, not with patents or profit margins, but with something as simple as giving." Michael took her hand. "Your boardroom collapse was just the beginning of a different kind of legacy." That night in their hotel room, Michael found Rebecca on the balcony gazing at the city lights. She turned when she heard him, her face illuminated by the soft glow from inside. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "how different things would have been if you hadn't gone to donate blood that day?" Michael leaned against the railing beside her. "I try not to. It feels like tempting fate," she smiled. "I think about it sometimes. How close we came to never meeting. How many things had to align perfectly." Michael tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Science would call it statistical probability. Billions of people, thousands of hospitals, hundreds of blood types. Eventually, some stories intersect." "And what would you call it?" she asked. He considered for a moment. "A beginning. Not the first or the last, just one of many possible doorways into a life." She leaned into him, their shoulders touching. "A life I wouldn't trade for anything." Back home, as lifeblood hope expanded, so did their family. Not by birth, but by choice. Marcus became a regular presence in their lives, first as a patient, then as Emma's science fair partner, and finally as simply another kid who showed up for Sunday dinners. His mother, Teresa Rivera, Dr. Rivera's younger sister, initially hesitant about the arrangement, gradually became part of their extended circle. A single parent like Michael had been, she found in Rebecca, and Michael not just medical allies, but friends who understood the weight she carried. On Marcus's 13th birthday, the Sullivans hosted a party in their backyard. Children ran through sprinklers, adults gathered around the grill, and for a few hours, no one was defined by illness or medicine or titles. Teresa found Rebecca by the dessert table arranging cupcakes. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly. Rebecca looked up. "For what?" "For seeing him. Not just his condition. You and Michael, you treat him like he's..." "Normal," Rebecca supplied. Teresa nodded. "There's so much focus on what's wrong with him. The medications, the appointments, the special considerations. Sometimes I forget there's a whole person there who just wants to be a kid." Rebecca watched as Marcus and Emma competed to see who could do the most ridiculous dive into the pool, both of them all gangly limbs and fearless laughter. "Michael was like that with Emma after Sarah died," she said. "So careful to make sure she had moments where she wasn't the girl who lost her mom. Just Emma." Teresa followed her gaze. "They're good for each other, like siblings." Rebecca smiled. "Family comes in all forms." Later, as the party wound down and the summer twilight stretched long shadows across the lawn, Michael found Rebecca collecting abandoned paper plates. "Good day," he said, helping her load the trash bag. She nodded toward where Marcus was showing Emma a new card trick their heads bent together in concentration. The best kind. Michael wrapped his arms around her from behind both of them, watching the children. You know he's going to be part of our lives forever now. Rebecca leaned back against him. I'm counting on it. As the Lifeblood Initiative expanded across the country, so did its impact. 5 years after its founding, the database had matched over 3,000 donors with recipients who might otherwise have had no options. Research papers were published, protocols established, lives transformed. Rivera's lab had become the epicenter of a medical revolution, focused not on drugs or devices, but on the hidden potential within human biology itself. One chilly October afternoon, as Michael finished his volunteer shift at the original Lifeblood Center, he found an unfamiliar man waiting in his office. Tall, distinguished, with the bearing of someone used to being listened to. Can I help you, Michael asked? The man stood, extending his hand. Dr. Sullivan, I'm James Harrington from the Nobel Committee for Medicine. Michael blinked, momentarily speechless. He knew the nomination had been submitted. Rebecca had shown him the paperwork. But having it materialize in the form of a man in his office made it suddenly alarmingly real. Mr. Harrington, he managed. This is unexpected, the man smiled. We like to conduct informal interviews with potential laureates. Get a sense of the human side of the research. Michael gestured to a chair. I'm not sure what I can tell you. The real genius is Dr. Rivera. And Rebecca, Mrs. Sullivan, she's the one who built the infrastructure. Harrington settled into the chair. Yet it all began with your blood donation, with your decision to help a stranger. Michael shifted uncomfortably. It was just what anyone would do. Not according to our research, Harrington countered gently. You turned down considerable compensation. You initially refused further involvement. These are not common responses. Michael looked out the window where patients and donors came and went through the center's glass doors, each one carrying some fragment of hope or gratitude. I lost my wife, he said finally, to a medical error that could have been prevented if someone had just listened, just cared enough to double-check. He turned back to Harrington. When I donated blood that day, I wasn't trying to be heroic. I was just trying to balance the scales a little, to put back some of what had been taken. Harrington nodded, making a brief note. And now, with Lifeblood, Hope's success, do you feel those scales are balanced? Michael considered the question. No, he said honestly, because it was never about balance. It was about finding meaning in what happened. Sarah died because a system failed her. If what we're building now means that system fails fewer people, then her death wasn't just a tragedy. It becomes part of something larger. Something like redemption, Harrington suggested. Michael shook his head. Not redemption. Transformation, turning wounds into doors. The conversation continued for an hour, ranging from technical aspects of the research to philosophical questions about medicine's purpose. When Harrington finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. You know, Dr. Sullivan, in my years with the committee, I've interviewed hundreds of brilliant minds. People who have mapped genomes, created vaccines, pioneered surgical techniques. But rarely have I encountered someone for whom the science and the humanity are so completely intertwined. Michael walked him to the exit. It's not just me, it's all of us, Rebecca, Emma, Dr. Rivera, even Marcus, our first pediatric success. We're not building a treatment, we're building a community. Harrington nodded. That, Dr. Sullivan, is precisely why I'm here. That December, as snow-dusted Manhattan, Michael, Rebecca, Dr. Rivera, and the core Lifeblood team gathered around a television in the center's break room. The Nobel announcements were being broadcast live from Stockholm. The room fell silent as the medicine category was announced. The presenter's voice echoed through the speakers. For their groundbreaking work in identifying and applying adaptive antibody structures in the treatment of autoimmune disorders, this year's Nobel Prize in Medicine is awarded jointly to Dr. Camila Rivera, Rebecca Sullivan, and Dr. Michael Sullivan for the establishment of the Lifeblood Initiative. The room erupted. Dr. Rivera covered her mouth in shock. Rebecca gripped Michael's hand so tightly he lost feeling in his fingers. Around them, the staff cheered, hugged, cried. But Michael's eyes were fixed on a small photo on his desk, Sarah smiling from a simple silver frame. In the chaos and joy of the moment, he felt her presence more clearly than he had in years. This is for you too, he whispered. This is what came from our broken pieces. The Nobel ceremony in Stockholm was a blur of formal attire, diplomatic receptions, and media attention. The Sullivans and Dr. Rivera found themselves thrust into a spotlight far removed from their lab benches in donation centers. On the night of the award, as they prepared in their hotel suite, Rebecca struggled with the clasp of her necklace. Michael stepped behind her, taking the delicate chain from her trembling fingers. Nervous, he asked, securing the clasp. Terrified, she admitted. Public speaking was never an issue when it was quarterly reports. But this, he turned her to face him, straightening the lapel of her elegant black dress. This is just another boardroom, he said. Except instead of shareholders, it's the world. She laughed. That's not helping. He kissed her forehead. Then think of it this way. Tonight isn't about us. It's about Sarah and Emma and Marcus. It's about every donor and recipient in our database. We're just the messengers. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. When did you get so wise, Dr. Sullivan? Around the time I married the smartest woman I know. The ceremony itself was stately formal, rich with tradition. When their names were called, the three recipients walked forward together, a unified front rather than competing egos. Dr. Rivera, as the primary researcher, accepted the medal and certificate, but when it came time for the speech, she stepped aside, nodding to Rebecca. Rebecca approached the podium, the lights of the hall gleaming off her simple silver earrings, a gift from Emma that morning. She took a deep breath, finding Michael's eyes in the front row, and began. Medicine has always existed at the intersection of science and humanity. For centuries, we've treated these as separate domains, the clinical in the personal, the measurable in the felt. The Lifeblood Initiative began with a question: what if they aren't separate at all? What if our bodies at their most fundamental level recognize something in each other that our instruments cannot detect? What if healing isn't just about correcting biological errors, but about connection? 7 years ago, I collapsed in a boardroom from what should have been a fatal autoimmune response. A man I had never met donated blood that contained antibodies my doctors had never seen. Science called it a statistical anomaly. I call it the beginning of a journey. That journey has led us here. But this award doesn't belong to the three people standing on this stage. It belongs to every person who has ever rolled up a sleeve and offered a piece of themselves to a stranger. It belongs to every patient who trusted us with their hope. It belongs to a little girl who lost her mother and still believed in magic. It belongs to a boy named Marcus, who taught us that receiving can be its own form of giving. Most of all, it belongs to Sarah Sullivan, whose absence created the space for this work to exist, whose memory reminds us daily that medicine without compassion is just technology. The Lifeblood Initiative isn't about creating a miracle drug or a perfect protocol. It's about recognizing that the miracle has been within us all along, in our capacity to heal each other, to see each other, to choose each other, even when science tells us it's impossible. Thank you for this honor. We accept it on behalf of everyone whose blood and heart and hope have become part of this ongoing story. The applause was thunderous. Michael, watching from his seat, felt a peculiar lightness in his chest, as if something long carried had finally been set down. In that moment, he understood what Sarah's letter had truly meant all those years ago. Love wasn't just about moving forward. It was about expanding, including transforming loss into something that could hold joy without diminishing what came before. At the reception afterward, amid champagne toasts and congratulations, Michael slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking Stockholm's twinkling cityscape. The air was crisp, his breath forming small clouds in the December night. He wasn't surprised when Rebecca found him there, a shawl hastily thrown over her shoulders against the cold. Hiding, she asked, joining him at the railing. Breathing, he corrected. She leaned against him, her warmth a counter to the winter air. You're thinking about Sarah. It wasn't a question, but he nodded, wondering what she would make of all this. Nobel Prizes and gala receptions weren't exactly part of our world. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think she'd be proud, she said finally, not of the award, but of the man you've become, of the father you've been to Emma, of the lives you've touched. He turned to her, taking in the sight of her, still elegant in her formal dress, but with her hair coming slightly undone, her lipstick faded from the evening's conversations. In that moment, she looked more like the woman who had shown up in jeans to Emma's birthday than the CEO who had once commanded boardrooms. I couldn't have done any of it without you, he said simply. She smiled. We built it together. All of it. He took her hand, tracing the wedding band that still gleamed on her finger. I have something for you. From his pocket, he pulled a small box, not velvet this time, but worn leather. Rebecca opened it carefully. Inside lay a pendant, a simple silver droplet, small but perfectly formed. For our anniversary, he explained, 7 years since that storm, since the hospital, since everything changed. She turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten it around her neck. The pendant nestled at the hollow of her throat, catching the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, like the woman wearing it. She leaned up to kiss him, a gesture as familiar now as breathing, yet still capable of making the world recede. When they parted, she kept her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "After Nobel Prizes and international recognition, what's our next chapter?" He smiled against her hair. "Now we go home. We have a teenage daughter with college applications to finish, a center to run, a Christmas tree to decorate." She laughed. "So ordinary after all this." He pulled back to look at her. "That's the point, isn't it? We've spent 7 years proving that the most extraordinary things happen in the most ordinary moments. A man donates blood, a woman survives, a child finds hope. None of it makes headlines until later." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. The real miracles happen in living rooms and hospital corridors, in backyard birthday parties and quiet attics, where old letters wait to be read. Exactly. They stood together on the balcony, the Nobel medal forgotten inside the city lights below them, like earthbound stars. In that moment, they were not laureates or pioneers or even survivors. They were simply two people who had found each other in the midst of storm and loss, who had built something neither could have created alone. And that, more than any award or recognition, was the true legacy of what had begun in a hospital donation center on a rainy Manhattan morning 7 years before. A legacy written not in scientific journals or press releases, but in the quiet, indelible language of lives transformed. One drop, one heart, one choice at a time. 3 years after Stockholm, on a crisp autumn morning, Michael stood in the doorway of what had once been Emma's bedroom. At 18, she had left for college, pre-med at Johns Hopkins, with a focus on immunology that surprised no one. The room had been repurposed as a study, but Michael kept one wall untouched, the one with height marks tracking Emma's growth and a collage of her childhood drawings. Rebecca appeared behind him with 2 mugs of coffee. "You're brooding," she teased, handing him one. Reflecting, he corrected, accepting the mug with a smile. She studied his face, reading the subtle lines time had etched around his eyes. On what? Everything, he admitted. How one decision can change countless lives. Rebecca leaned against him, following his gaze to the wall of memories. "That's the beauty of it, isn't it? We never know which choice will be the one that matters most." The doorbell interrupted their moment. Rebecca checked her watch. "Right on time?" "As always," she said with a smile. Emma's trained him well. They descended the stairs together to find Marcus on their doorstep, now 16 tall and lanky, with the easy confidence of a teenager who had overcome far more than most. Under his arm was a thick portfolio. "Hey, Dr. S." "Mrs. S," he greeted them. "Thanks for letting me come over. I needed help with my college essay." Michael ushered him inside. "You know you don't need an excuse to visit, right?" Marcus grinned. "Yeah, but this time I actually need help. I'm applying for the Lifeblood Scholarship. The essay prompt is, how has giving or receiving shaped your understanding of community?" Rebecca led them to the kitchen, where she'd laid out lunch. "That's right up your alley. I know," Marcus said, spreading his drafts across the table. "But how do I tell the story without making it sound like I'm using my medical history for points?" Michael poured him a glass of water. "Start with the truth. The most powerful stories aren't about what happened to us, but about how we made meaning from it." Marcus looked up at him. "That's good. Can I quote you in the essay?" Rebecca laughed. "He's been saying variations of that for years. I think it's public domain by now." As they worked through the essay, Marcus's natural intelligence and insight shining through his drafts, Michael felt a familiar warmth in his chest. The pride of watching someone grow into themselves, the privilege of being even a small part of that journey. This was the true legacy of Lifeblood Hope. Not the Nobel Prize displayed modestly on their mantle, not the research centers now operating in 12 cities across the country, not even the thousands of matches made between donors and recipients. The true legacy sat at their kitchen table, alive and thriving, planning a future that once seemed impossible. The true legacy was in the way Marcus unconsciously touched the medical alert bracelet on his wrist, not with shame or fear, but with the casual acceptance of someone who understood that vulnerability and strength were not opposites, but partners. Marcus would go on to college and medical school after that. He would eventually join the Lifeblood research team, bringing the unique perspective of someone who had lived on both sides of the medical equation. And years later, when Emma returned from her fellowship abroad, their childhood friendship would blossom into something neither had expected, but both had secretly hoped for. But that was still to come. For now, there was just this moment. The boy at a kitchen table, two adults who had created a space for him to belong, and the quiet certainty that no life is ever truly saved alone. That night, after Marcus had gone home with a polished essay and promises to return for Sunday dinner, Michael and Rebecca sat on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about expanding the Lifeblood initiative again." Michael turned to her, curious. In what direction? She leaned forward to that familiar spark of vision in her eyes. "What if we created a mentorship program, pairing survivors with current patients, expanding beyond the medical to address the emotional aspects of chronic illness, like what Marcus and Emma have naturally but formalized?" Exactly. The research shows that outcomes improve dramatically when patients have strong support systems. But not everyone has what Marcus found in us. Michael nodded slowly. "It makes sense. The blood is just the beginning. The healing continues long after the transfusion." Rebecca took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his with the ease of long practice. "What do you think? One more chapter to our story?" He smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "Our story doesn't have chapters, Rebecca. It has doorways, each one leading to something we couldn't have imagined before." She leaned against him, her head finding that perfect spot on his shoulder. "Then, let's walk through this one together." Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Below, in hospitals across the country, blood flowed from donor to recipient, carrying life and possibility in each crimson drop. And in countless homes, people who might never know the Sullivans by name breathed easier, loved deeper, lived fuller, because two broken people had once decided that healing others might be the surest path to healing themselves. It was never about the miracle of one man's blood saving one woman's life. It was about what happened after, when that woman chose to save a little girl, when that little girl grew up to save others, when patients became family and strangers became beloved. It was about a circle of giving that had no beginning and no end. A legacy not of wealth or fame or power, but of the quiet heroism found in rolling up one's sleeve, extending one's hand, opening one's heart. One drop at a time, one choice at a time, one love at a time. And in the gathering darkness of that autumn evening, Michael Sullivan held the woman who had once been a stranger, then a patient, then a partner, now the cornerstone of a life rebuilt from fragments. They sat together in the peaceful knowledge that their greatest achievement wasn't the lives they'd saved through Lifeblood hope, but the life they'd built together. Not perfect, but perfectly theirs. Above the Lifeblood Hope Center, a simple plaque greeted each visitor. It read, "One drop saves a life, one heart heals a soul. In memory of those we lost, and in honor of those who chose to give." And if you asked anyone, donor or recipient researcher or volunteer, why it worked, why strangers from all walks of life showed up to participate in this quiet revolution, they would point to two people who had turned pain into purpose and grief into grace. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to forgive, to love, to begin again. And in that willingness lay the most powerful medicine of all.